Somewhere in the Malayan jungle, Freddie Spencer Chapman woke up in a puddle of his own sweat, skull pounding like a war drum. 17 pages of his journal were blank. 17 days gone, swallowed by a malaria-induced coma. Now he was back. His body was a wreck, skin draped over bone. Around him, rot, mud, and flies. Outside, the jungle hissed. Somewhere out there, Japanese patrols swept the undergrowth for what reports claimed was a 200-strong commando outfit. But it was just him. Alone, starving, dying, but not finished. Because Chapman wasn't built like other men. He was one with the wild, a survival machine. And before the illness took him to his grave, he figured he would give the Japanese one final, fevered gift. Yorkshire, 1921. While his Sedberg classmates trudged toward the cricket pitch, 14-year-old Freddie Chapman disappeared into the fells. The headmaster, recognizing something untamable in the boy, had excused him from organized sports 3 afternoons a week. These 18 hours of freedom were the perfect time for Chapman to carry out his grueling expeditions 36 miles across moorland that offered no mercy to the unprepared. He had little interest in schoolwork. Quote, "Lessons I considered were things to be avoided by all possible means, fair or foul, and organized games were a waste of a fine afternoon." The young boy was much more concerned with maintaining his staggering 6 miles per hour rate across terrain that would bring grown men to their knees. He frequently covered 20-mile swathes without encountering another human being. The isolation suited him. He had been essentially alone from the moment he was born. His mother passed away within hours of delivering him in 1907, and his father, unwilling or unable to care for the child, vanished soon after, sending only the occasional letter from abroad. When Freddie was 9, news came that his father had fallen at the Somme. It merely confirmed what the boy had already known deep down for years. He was an orphan. Cambridge accepted him in 1926 on a Kitchener scholarship to study history and English. Chapman arrived with different plans. His first night, he scaled the ancient chapel spires while other freshmen attended orientation. Within weeks, he'd purchased a decrepit motorcycle for £8 sterling and discovered the Cambridge University Mountaineering Club, where Geoffrey Winthrop Young presided as the elder statesman of British alpinism. Under Young's mentorship, Chapman evolved from fell runner to expedition organizer. He led trips to Iceland to study Arctic flora and bird life, progressing to increasingly technical alpine routes that pushed the limits of 1920s climbing equipment. By 1930, word of Chapman's capabilities had reached Gino Watkins, who was assembling a team for his British Arctic air route expedition to survey potential flight paths across Greenland. Watkins needed men who could ski, climb, navigate, and endure months of Arctic isolation. Chapman accepted before Watkins finished speaking. Greenland, 1930. Chapman stepped off the ship into a frozen land that would strip the flesh from his bones and test every lesson the Yorkshire fells had taught him. As ski expert and naturalist for Gino Watkins' British Arctic air route expedition, he joined a team of other seasoned survivalists and scientists. Despite all of his training, Chapman learned the hard way that Greenland was not Yorkshire. Temperatures plunged so low that he lost all his fingernails and toenails to frostbite. Once, the sea ice shattered beneath his dog team. As the sledge began to plunge into the freezing waters, Chapman's survival instinct kicked in, and he drove the sledge forward at full speed, the ice splintering behind them, escaping by mere inches. The worst came during a coastal survey. A massive storm trapped Chapman in his kayak for 20 hours, unable to land through the crushing waves. He paddled through the night, knowing that to stop meant capsizing, and capsizing meant freezing. How close he had come to losing his life became clear in August 1931. Gino Watkins, the charismatic expedition leader who had recruited him, went seal hunting alone. They found his kayak overturned, caught by the wild surf. The Arctic had claimed the man who'd conquered it. Chapman and the remaining team completed the survey, becoming the first Europeans since Nansen to cross the Greenland ice cap. Despite the harrowing experiences he endured, Chapman would recall with a smile on his face, "I do not think that any time in my life has been or could be happier than those years in Greenland." Chapman continued to reach new grounds in the world of exploration. By 1937, Chapman had joined Basil Gould's diplomatic mission as private secretary, learning enough Tibetan to negotiate what seemed impossible: permission to climb Jomolari, the sacred 7,326-meter peak that drops in a series of almost vertical rock precipices. The mountain dominated the old Everest approach route, forbidden to climbers, home to the protector goddess Jomo. Chapman played diplomatic chess from the nearest village with a post office, waiting with 3 Sherpa porters, including Pasang Dawa Lama, who would later distinguish himself on K2. Permission arrived on Chapman's 30th birthday, May 10, 1937. 10 days later, Chapman and Pasang stood on the summit. The descent turned catastrophic. They fell from the summit ridge. He fell through a deep crevasse after slipping during a descent. He was stuck between 2 massive walls of stone, but he refused to make that place his tomb. For 4 hours, he carved ice steps with his knife, climbing 30 feet to safety. In 1939, war swept across Europe. Chapman joined the Seaforth Highlanders as a lieutenant, his Arctic and Himalayan experience making him invaluable for what lay ahead. The military tapped him to train Australian and New Zealand forces in guerrilla warfare, eventually sending him to Special Training School 101 in Singapore. Chapman was given a unique last resort mission to organize stay-behind parties throughout Malaya, trained locals who would wreak havoc on Japanese supply lines if the unthinkable happened and Singapore fell. He recruited Indians, Chinese, and Malays, teaching them explosives, ambush tactics, and jungle survival. Hidden supply caches dotted the peninsula. Everything was ready. Then, colonial governor Sir Shenton Thomas terminated the program. Singapore was impregnable. Spending resources in preparing for when it would fall was both useless and defeatist, he declared. Chapman's trained guerrillas were disbanded and sent home. The supply network was abandoned. Singapore fell in barely a few days in February 1942. Japanese forces drove through Malaya like a tsunami while the British command structure collapsed in on itself. Chapman watched the catastrophe unfold, knowing that his disbanded network could have slowed the invasion, maybe even saved Singapore. Instead, he found himself with 2 British officers and whatever supplies remained from the cancelled program: 100 grenades and 1,000 pounds of plastic explosives. The Japanese army numbered in the tens of thousands. Chapman's force was only 3 men strong. They launched what Chapman would later call their mad fortnight. Railway bridges detonated in sequence, and the small team of saboteurs turned 15 of them into twisted metal. Locomotives hauling troops derailed at full speed. 7 trains were destroyed. The 3-man squad ghosted through the jungle, setting charges, vanishing before the explosions rattled the valleys. They ambushed convoys on mountain roads, destroying 40 military vehicles. When explosives ran low, Chapman packed bamboo tubes with gunpowder and scrap metal to create deadly grenades. The Japanese command panicked. Radio intercepts revealed they believed at least 200 British commandos were operating behind their lines. They deployed 2,000 troops to hunt them down. The Japanese could not find Chapman's team. He had taught his men how to embrace the wilderness, blend into it for weeks at a time, but there was no hiding from disease. Malaria, typhus, blackwater fever, tick typhus, pneumonia, all ravaged Chapman's body simultaneously. His companions perished one by one from the illness. Alone and delirious, Chapman stumbled into a Japanese patrol. The commanding officer listened to this skeletal Englishman claim a Japanese prince had been his bird-watching companion at Cambridge. He remembers, quote, "The arresting officer was apparently so charmed that he apologized for having no whiskey to offer and declined to take him prisoner. It was clear he had mere hours left, but he held on not only to life but to his mission's objective." Alone in the Malayan jungle, Chapman faced a choice: escape to India or disappear into the green hell and continue fighting. He chose the jungle. For more than 3 years, he would live as a ghost, training communist guerrillas, while the diseases that had invaded his body waged their own war against him. The Chinese communists made contact with the now skeletal British man. Chin Peng, their leader, understood Chapman's expertise was invaluable, despite his personal dislike for the British, and Chapman needed their network if he was to continue with his mission. Chapman became a covert instructor, moving between guerrilla camps hidden deep in the jungle. He taught explosives, ambush tactics, and the patience required to fight an occupying army. His students would use these same skills against the British during the Malayan emergency, but that irony lay in the future. For now, they fought Japanese patrols together. Through it all, Chapman maintained his discipline as a naturalist. He pressed plants, collected seeds, and filled notebooks with observations on Malayan flora and fauna. He encoded military intelligence in Inuit, the language he learned in Greenland. When Japanese patrols captured him, they confiscated these journals, puzzling over botanical drawings mixed with indecipherable Arctic script. Chapman's biographer Brian Moynihan would later remark, "What kept him going was his overriding love of nature and wildlife. That's what kept his mind alive." After 18 months cut off from the world, in late 1943, Chapman re-established contact with British forces. John Davis and Richard Broome from Force 136 joined him, but their isolation continued. They scavenged parts to repair their radio, car batteries charged with pedal dynamos, and vacuum tubes pulled from Japanese equipment. When they finally reached Colombo, their message sparked plans for supply drops and reinforcements. By 1945, they'd built a functioning resistance network, but his fight against the Japanese and against the jungle fevers continued. One morning, Chapman woke disoriented, his journal open beside him. 17 pages were blank. He counted back the dates. 17 days missing, erased by a coma his body had somehow survived. By an incredible stroke of luck, he had been found by his guerrilla comrades instead of the Japanese. The trek to escape began at war's end. Chapman and his team reached Pulau Pangkor Laut disguised as Chinese laborers, where HMS Statesman surfaced to extract them. 3 years, 4 months in enemy territory, wounds that would never fully heal, knowledge that would help the British fight the very guerrillas he'd trained. Field Marshal Earl Wavell compared him to Lawrence of Arabia. For sheer courage and endurance, physical and mental, the two men stand together. Chapman returned to England transformed. The man who had conquered Arctic ice and sacred peaks soon learned that surviving civilian life after what he had endured was the most difficult challenge of all. In 1971, the pain, finally overwhelming him. He left a note for his wife. "I don't want you to have to nurse an invalid for the rest of my life." The jungle had been neutral. Memory and a body broken by disease and time were not.